has reacted to India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's visit to Russia amid the ongoing Ukraine war. And just a day after S. Jaishankar met his counterpart in Moscow, US struck a warning note saying Russia isn't a reliable partner on energy and security assistance. Now remember, this comes just a day after Jaishankar's note on an era of a war remark in Russia. All right, the US has in fact reacted to India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar's visit to Russia, and this is amid the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war, and this is also just a day after S. Jaishankar met his counterpart in Moscow. Now, US has struck a warning note. The US has said that Russia isn't a reliable partner on energy and security assistance. So the US has gone on to say that reduced dependence on Russia. Russia is not a reliable partner. Now remember, this is coming after Jaishankar met his counterpart, Lavrov, in Moscow. And going straight across to Maruf Raza, who's joining us on the phone line for more on this. Sir, if you could, read into the statement by the US. The US is essentially saying that Russia is not a reliable partner for energy. Oh.
You see, the US can't get out of its Cold War mindset. And the whole agenda of the American State Department is to basically have every country of consequence on its side. It is not being able to come to terms with the fact that there are countries that want to exercise an independent foreign policy like India. And therefore, they are constantly badgering India for going towards Russia for its own reasons of domestic politics, economics, and geostrategic factors. The US is not exactly a saint in white gloves. They have been responsible for creating many of the world's big problems and have supported countries that have a track record for sponsoring terrorism. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are two cases in point. So to morally lecture India and grandstand in front of India is a joke. The second thing is, the US is very keen that Russia collapses economically and collapses militarily. Neither of the two has been happening despite every US effort to keep announcing sanctions, because Russia is making money despite the sanctions. And Russian sales of oil and gas to India is not the only reason the Russian economy is afloat despite the war and sanctions. It is selling large amounts of that to China. The US cannot do much to China, has no control over China. It has been selling also up to European countries who until now had asked for time up to early December to fill their containers so that then they will stop importing Russian gas and then the sanctions will come into play. So why separate sets of rules for separate countries? And why separate moral standards for themselves and the rest of the world? The Ukraine conflict, US has been supplying Ukraine large amounts of ammunition and people pretending to be irregulars, but they are regular soldiers. They're called military advisors. You think Ukraine could have sustained against a massive Russian military invasion on its own? It could not. So therefore, the Americans are doing everything to suit their agenda. And that is why Mr. Jaishankar has made it clear. We will do what is advantageous to our people. We are not a rich country. We cannot pay high prices for oil and gas. And we need to keep the lights burning in India. So to that extent, if India continues to buy oil from Russia, which long before the Ukraine conflict, Mr. Modi had inaugurated the initiative to get oil from Russia from Siberian called the Vladivostok line, and the North-South corridor, which India has been investing in Iran, and from there into Central Asia and Russia. For years, India has been investing. But everything Pakistan does is acceptable to the US. But what India does, the US complains about. And they say, don't worry about Pakistan, it's a minor irritant. I'm sorry, It's a minor irritant to people in US who are not getting harassed by Lashkar-e-Toiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed. It's a big problem for us in India. And the last point is that if India's increase of oil has increased from Russia, the US should be grateful because we are taking less oil from the Middle East. The Middle East can transfer some of that oil and gas to America's top partners in Europe, which are having a crisis, and they're already going in for a cold winter. If we continue to demand the kind of oil that contractually countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE and others were to give us, and the gas from Qatar, European friends of America would freeze. So at the cost of putting Russia into the dock, the US is willing to make sure that everybody else is uncomfortable except the US voter and US citizen. So I really have got very little patience for this kind of utterances from the US. Back to you.
Right. The other thing I wanted to ask is what sort of message is the US really trying to send with a statement like this?
Well, this is trying to send, and that has been the standard US foreign policy line, that you are either with us or against us. But the US, I have argued for years, I've written about it a number of times also, that you see, it is to our advantage to take an independent stand. It is to our advantage to do things that will suit us and our pockets and our economy. It is to America's advantage to use India, if it wants to, against China and its expansion in Asia. If the US decides to dump India, its entire foreign policy agenda to corner China and Asia will go to the dogs. So the US knows it cannot abandon India. And the US also knows that it cannot do without India in Asia to give the message of all democracies to stick together. But when it comes to the US's own agenda, I'll give you one example. The US decided to make nuclear submarines with Australia and Britain, called the AUKUS plan. We have always wanted nuclear submarines. It's a very important factor for India's security. We are also buying submarines from here and there, and we need a nuclear submarine program so that we can counter the threats of China and Pakistan. China's submarines, as you would know, has been going around the Indian coastline from Sri Lanka to Pakistan quite regularly. But they invested in Australia. They still don't trust us because at the end of the day, it is the white man's agenda against the rest of the Oriental world. And we need to stand up against that. That if you don't trust us with your top-end security technology, but you trust Australia and Britain to put together a nuclear program, then don't blame us if we buy Russian submarines. We have got them on lease, but that's just a euphemism for the fact that you can use it for everything except pay hard cash for it. But we will make our choices, you make your choices, period.
Right, Maruf, many thanks for putting that into perspective for our viewers.